Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Cooking with Plants. This is month number 5, and tonight's topic is flavorful cooking. So we're going to dive into the fabulous world of taste and flavor, talk about what makes taste happen, what makes flavorful meals, and then we're going to make some recipes together that will help you enhance the flavor of your plant-forward meals. I'm Kelly Wilson. I am a board-certified lifestyle medicine dietitian, and I'm based in Southeast Michigan at Trinity Health Ann Arbor. If you're not familiar with lifestyle medicine, it is a medical subspecialty that uses evidence-based information in 6 key pillars to treat, prevent, and reverse chronic illness and promote whole person health. Those 6 key pillars are a whole food, plant-forward dietary pattern, and that's what we talk about in this class. We also talk to folks about moving their body daily, getting restorative sleep, getting positive social connection, avoiding risky substances, and managing stress in healthful ways. So lifestyle medicine uses evidence-based philosophies in each of those key pillars to support our patients towards whole health. We are in a cooking class tonight, so I also wanted to share a little bit about my culinary philosophy to level set and hopefully get you excited about the class tonight. I really believe that anybody can cook. You don't have to have fancy training to be able to prepare delicious meals. And this class is really designed for anyone, whether you're a new cook or you've been cooking at home for a long time. Hopefully, there's something that you can take away from this class wherever you are on your culinary journey. And I also really believe that delicious food can be affordable and healthy. Healthy food doesn't have to taste bad, and it doesn't have to be expensive. All of the recipes that we cover in this class series are budget conscious, and they're delicious because I don't want to eat boring, untasty food. I want to eat delicious food, and so I want to share delicious food with you. All of the recipes that I share are always suggestions. So if you don't have an ingredient or you can't find it in the grocery store, you can swap something out to replace it. It's totally fine. Or if you don't quite have a taste for something that's in the recipe, swap it with something that you do already enjoy. And then finally, if you are new to this plant-forward way of eating, which can really be summed up as eat whole food, mostly plants, if that way of eating is new to you, be patient with yourself as you make changes. Change takes time. It takes us about 66 days before we can form a new habit, which are those unconscious patterns that we repeat on a daily basis. Be very kind and patient to yourself. Be persistent. So if you don't hold to your goals or to the standards that you set for yourself 100% of the time, that's okay. Just make sure that you're continuing to reorient yourself in the right direction. And choose small goals and celebrate any win that you have along the way, no matter how quote unquote small it might seem. All right, a couple housekeeping things. Just want to make sure if you need closed captions, you can access those. So you can go to the ellipses at the top of your screen where it says more, select language and speech, and then turn on live captions, and you should see those populate on your screen. If you have questions tonight, please drop them in the Q&A box. This is something I will try to monitor during class and make sure we get to any questions by the end of the session. Please just make sure your questions are related to the class topic and are relevant to the whole group. If you have a question that's more specific for you or don't get to your question, please feel free to email us at lifestylemedicine@trinity-health.org and we'll make sure that you get a response. If you're a Trinity Health colleague, you get points towards keeping your insurance premiums low just for participating in this class, even if you're watching the recording. So email that lifestylemedicine@trinity-health.org email address, and you'll get your 250 points towards your lower insurance premiums. And as always, this is a general nutrition class. If you have a specific health condition, you may need to tweak some of the recipes to fit your dietary needs. And if you've been newly diagnosed with a chronic condition and you have not yet received advice or guidance on your diet from a registered dietitian, I highly recommend you seek support, personalized support from a registered dietitian before making drastic changes to your diet. Now, that being said, a lot of the foods that we cover in this class are good for a whole variety of chronic health conditions. That is the benefit of this plant-forward dietary pattern, is that it's good for a wide range of chronic health issues. Still always great to get personalized advice based on your situation. So please feel free to reach out to that email that you see on the screen if you need help connecting to a nutrition professional. This is our class series. We're always meeting the second Wednesday of the month from 6:30 to 7:30. Today, like I said, we're focused on flavor, but you can see all of the other classes that we've already covered and what we have planned here on the screen. If someone forwarded you this class and you aren't registered for this series, you can go ahead and scan that QR code and it'll take you to our website to register so that you will receive the emails and the recording links for future classes. And as a reminder, that the class website has all of the recordings for all of our past classes, as well as all of the recipes for tonight's class and our past classes. All right, with all that housekeeping out of the way, let's talk a little bit about flavor. So, flavor is this really interesting combination of both our perception of taste, mouthfeel, and aroma, so what we smell. And then there's this final like X factor that contributes some more emotional pieces to our experience of flavor. So flavor is really a function of all of our senses. And before we get into each of those components individually, I just want to share a couple notes that I think are helpful to keep in mind, especially if we're newer on this plant forward journey. There might be a lot of new flavors that we're experiencing for the first time. If we're used to eating a high fat, high sugar, or high salt diet, which is very common in that standard American diet, that quote unquote sad diet that we talked about in the very first class, if we're used to eating a higher proportion of those foods, our taste perception is dulled. Our sense of flavor is dulled. And it might take time before our taste buds start adjusting to a lower fat, lower sugar, lower salt way of eating. And once our taste buds do adjust, and it'll only take a few weeks for that to happen, we're really going to be able to experience a wide range of flavors that we've been missing out on because those taste buds have been dulled. Similarly, if you're currently a smoker or you recently quit smoking, smoking can also dull our taste perceptions. So if you choose to quit, that can be something to look forward to, is the ability to enjoy a whole wide range of tastes in your food that you might not have been experiencing before. Like I said, our taste buds change every couple weeks, which is really exciting. So if you don't have a taste for something right now, that means that you have the opportunity to develop that taste and develop that sense of enjoyment with that food. And the best way to train your taste buds is to just keep trying things. It takes about 8 to 9 repeated exposures to a new food before we start to become familiar with that flavor and enjoy that taste. And another way that we can kind of help ourselves start to branch into new flavors is to combine maybe some unfamiliar flavors with tastes that we typically enjoy. So do you like a corn tortilla, is that something that you enjoy? Maybe you're combining your lentil taco meat with that corn tortilla and you're putting the same like taco seasoning spices that you would on your ground beef on those lentils in your corn tortilla. So you're pairing that unfamiliar flavor of the lentils with the familiar flavor of that corn tortilla and the taco seasoning. It's also really helpful to try new foods during enjoyable experiences. So, if you're traveling, if you're celebrating a special occasion, you're going out to dinner with loved ones, those are all positive experiences usually. And if you try a new food in those positive social situations, we tend to then associate that food with positive feelings, good emotions, and we're more likely to perceive that taste of that food in a positive light. And then you can also experiment with different preparation methods. So I don't know if anybody grew up in a household where vegetables were boiled to death. I don't know very many people who enjoy the taste of a boiled Brussels sprout. But if you roast that Brussels sprout, now that's a completely different vegetable. And we've got some caramelization happening that's bringing out some of the sweetness, decreasing some of the bitterness of that Brussels sprout. So the way you prepare a food, particularly vegetables, can totally change its flavor. So keep those things in mind as you're starting to challenge yourself with trying some of these new foods. All right, so I mentioned that flavor is made up of several different components, and one of those components is taste. And there are five, sometimes six, depending on the resources that you read, different taste families or categories. And food tastes really good. Like we go, yum, when we taste something that has all of these flavors balanced. So let's talk about some examples in each of these different taste families, and then we'll talk about how we can balance those tastes. So bitter, examples of bitter foods or bitter tastes would be raw unsweetened chocolate or cacao, coffee or black tea, radicchio, which is that if you have had salad mix before and there's that kind of purple or red leaf that tastes a little bit bitter, that's radicchio, dandelion greens, and then some leafy greens like chard and kale. Some folks feel like those taste bitter. And bitter is actually the taste that our bodies are most sensitive to because if you think about it, evolutionarily, bitter flavors meant poison. A lot of alkaloids, which are poisonous, a lot of alkaloid compounds in plants have bitter tastes. So we evolved to associate bitter tasting things with poison. So a lot of us have kind of a visceral reaction to bitter flavors. But don't worry, there are a lot of things we can do with balancing some of these other taste families to cut down on that perception of bitter so that we can enjoy chard and kale and radicchio and some of these other bitter foods. Sour is another taste family, and sour is really, if you think of foods that have kind of a sparkle or a brightness to them. So think of things like citrus or vinegar, pickled or fermented foods. And then tamarind, which is common in a lot of like Mexican cuisine and some Southeast Asian cuisine, that also has kind of a sour flavor. Umami is this rich, savory, mouth-filling kind of flavor, and it's going to be found in foods like nutritional yeast, fermented foods like miso, vegetables like mushrooms and tomatoes, especially dried tomatoes. They have a ton of umami. And you also find it in sea vegetables like kombu and tofu. And when you taste a dish and it feels flat, often it's missing either some umami, so that savoriness to kind of round it out and give it that robust mouthfeel, or it's missing some sour to add some sparkle and like that little bit of pizzazz. Salt is a flavor enhancer, so it is a taste category, and there's lots of different sources of salt beyond just like salt, the mineral. We can get that salty taste from things like soy sauce or tamari, or we use a lot of coconut aminos in this class. You can also find it in fish sauce, capers, olives, all great places to add salt. Sweet, I think this is one a lot of us are familiar with. Sweet is also a flavor enhancer, just like salt. And we find this in things like maple syrup and honey, right? Those are our sugars. We can also find it in our dried fruits, our root vegetables. The roots of plants are where they store their sugars that they use for fuel. So the root vegetables, so things like carrots, parsnips, potatoes, sweet potatoes, all tend to have a little bit more sweetness to them, which comes out when they're roasted and they're so delicious. Winter squash also would be another great example of a vegetable that has some inherent sweetness to it. And then finally, the last taste family that's often included as a category is spicy, or it's sometimes referred to as pungent foods. And these would be things like chili peppers, ginger, wasabi, horseradish, or arugula, which is a green that has it's a brassica. It's in the same family as kale and all that, but it's got a little bit of bite to it. All right. So now that we know all the different taste families, we want to think about how we can make them work in concert together to make our food absolutely delicious. So, this is where when we're tasting food, we want to try to pick up on, all right, what taste family am I experiencing? Am I experiencing a lot of bitterness? Okay, well then maybe I want to think about adding some salt, some umami, or something sweet to help round out that bitterness. So you could think of this, an example would be we use a lot of raw cacao powder in chocolate-based desserts, right? Um, if we just had that raw cacao in and of itself, that's really bitter. So we usually add some sugar. So it might be dates, it might be maple syrup, it might be cane sugar to help balance out the bitterness of that. Bitter is typically something that we're working to balance, and it's really rare that we're adding bitter flavors to dishes. Often that's just bitter is just an inherent flavor of a dish. Sour. So to balance out overly sour flavors, we would use spicy and sweet. So you could think of this as, or sorry, so, excuse me, sour taste can help balance out overly bitter, spicy, and sweet flavors. So we could think of this as when we're sauteing like a big batch of chard. We mentioned chard as being one of those greens that tastes a little bit bitter to us. We can add a splash of lemon juice at the end, and that adds that nice brightness that can kind of help tamp down some of that bitterness. For umami, this is a really great tool for balancing out that bitter. So you could think of nutritional yeast on broccoli, or if we go, because broccoli is one of those foods that some people experience as bitter, nutritional yeast has a lot of umami. If we go back to that chard example, one of my favorite ways to prepare Swiss chard is with cherry tomatoes because they have a lot of sweetness to them and they also pack a lot of umami punch. So sauteing the Swiss chard with some fresh cherry tomatoes can really help balance some of the bitterness in that as well. Salt, remember this is a flavor enhancer, so it increases our perception of sweet and it helps balance out our perception of sour. So if you ever had salt on top of a chocolate chip cookie, you definitely know what I'm talking about. Like that little bit of salt really enhances the experience of that chocolate chip cookie and makes it taste even sweeter. Sweet, I mentioned already, can be helpful for balancing out bitter. It's also helpful for balancing out sour. And if something's overly spicy, say you made a curry and you didn't add any sweetness to it, but you added a bunch of cayenne and it's a little too hot, add a little bit of sweetness to it, and it can help balance out that perception of that hot spice, right? We can also think of this. I'm stuck on Swiss chard tonight, so hopefully this is getting you excited to go make some Swiss chard. But I'm also thinking here with that Swiss chard example, we could caramelize some onions, and when we caramelize onions, there's a reaction that happens that brings out the natural sweetness of the onions, and that sweet onion, particularly red onions, can help balance out a little bit of that bitterness with the Swiss chard. So again, use this information to, when you're tasting your meals, to think about what taste you're experiencing and then how you might want to adjust the meal with different ingredients in each of these categories to round it out and really make it sing. All right, so that was taste. That was one portion of our flavor making categories. Another thing that goes into our experience of flavor is mouthfeel. So mouthfeel is exactly what it sounds like, and it's the experience of our food in our mouth beyond that initial taste. So temperature, texture, and astringency, which is if you've ever eaten a unripe banana and your mouth kind of like your cheeks kind of suck in and you pucker a little bit, that is astringency. So these three things can all really change how we're tasting. Coldness, for example, really suppresses sweetness. And when a dish is hot, it increases the spiciness, our experience of spiciness. So again, back to that curry example, if it tastes really spicy to you, let it cool down, try it again, and more likely than not, it will not taste as spicy. Then consider, like, temperature is also really important to consider as you're changing the ingredients in your dish, or you're choosing what foods to make on a particular day. So consider, we're coming into summer here soon. It's gonna be hot. Do you want a bowl of piping hot chili or soup on that hot day? More likely than not, the flavors in that dish are not going to taste as comforting and soothing as they would on a cold fall or winter day when you really want to wrap yourself around that warming bowl of soup. So consider the temperature outside as well when you're making your meal choices. Texture, so different textures of food can hold sauces differently. They also can provide a amount of excitement in our mouths. So if everything on our plate is the same texture, I mean, think of a traditional Thanksgiving meal where everything is kind of mashed and soft and maybe a little bit lumpy. That gets really boring after a while. So if we have different textured foods, foods in different shapes, like we're shredding some carrots, we've got some greens that are diced up, and we've got some chiffonaded green onions, and we're putting all of that on top of our grain bowl. We've got some different textures, and that's going to make eating that salad or grain bowl a little bit more interesting. Astringent, so again, this is that mouth puckering. We're going to experience that with foods like tea, wine, cranberries, pomegranate, and walnuts. Another component that influences flavor is smell. So about 80% of taste is smell, and it can really be seen, this connection can really be seen clearly in our use of aromatic vegetables. So these are vegetables that have strong senses of they emit a lot of strong smells. So our sweet aromatic vegetables are going to be our root vegetables, winter squash, basil, cinnamon, things like that. Our savory aromatics are going to be onions, garlic, celery, etc. So typically we're using these foods in the base of a dish to build that foundational flavor. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. And then finally, we've got the X factor. This is that emotional part of the flavor equation. It has a lot to do with the visual presentation, the conditions in which we're eating that food. If we're not stressed and we're with people that we love and we're in a comfortable environment, our experience of that food is going to be a lot more pleasurable than if we're rushing, if we're feeling a lot of tension with the people we're eating with. It's going to be a completely different flavor experience. Visual presentation matters. We eat with our eyes. So making the food on your plate pretty, like by varying the different colors and textures and adding garnishes like you see here in this picture, really enhances our overall enjoyment of a meal. And this is why restaurants do it. And you can do it at home with fresh herbs and spices and adding berries and nuts and things like that to treat yourself and really kind of take your meal to the next level. There's also some research that shows when we practice gratitude around meals, we are more likely to form positive associations with those foods, and we're more likely to enjoy those foods and have a pleasurable meal. This is not quite an X factor, but I did want to make a note because we are, at least in Michigan, moving into the height of the growing season here. So a lot of local produce is going to start to become available. Food that is picked in season at its peak ripeness has a much better flavor profile than that is picked out of season, unripe, and shipped thousands of miles away. And the easiest way that you can prove this to yourself is to buy a store grown tomato or store purchased tomato in the winter in a place like Michigan where we do not have tomatoes in the winter, and then compare that to a farmer's market tomato at the peak of summer. Completely different flavor profile. All right, we're going to talk through a couple quick tips on how to add flavor, and then I promise we will get to some cooking. So some ways that we can add flavor, we talked a little bit about aromatic vegetables. So these, again, are those veggies that have really strong smells that can increase the flavor of a dish. Garlic, onions, celery, carrots, peppers. Usually we dice these, we cook them in a little bit of fat or water if you're wanting to do the water saute at the beginning of the cooking process. Or if we're going to make a soup, we're simmering these in the broth. Every culture around the world has a combination of these different aromatic vegetables that form the foundation of their dish, right? So we've got mirepoix in French cooking. We've got sofrito in Latin cuisine that uses different combinations of these aromatic veggies. Our cooking techniques, I mentioned the boiling versus roasting already with our Brussels sprouts. That can go a long way in changing the flavor of the dish. Condiments, so we can add flavor to our foods by using things like kimchi, salsa, tomato sauce. We just want to be mindful of sodium and still be focusing on whole food options when we're selecting our condiments. Stocks and broths are a great way to add foundational flavor when we're cooking things like grains and beans. It goes a long way to supporting your end product to cook your rice to cook your dry beans in some veggie stock or broth. When you're thinking of adding flavor, we're really trying to layer flavor at every stage in the cooking process. So if you're, let's say you're making a chili, you're using those aromatic vegetables, you're sauteing some onions and garlic and maybe some celery in your pot, and you've cooked your beans in some veggie stock, and you're bringing all those together with your spices, you've layered flavor at three different points in the cooking process for that dish. So think about ways that you can kind of layer and build flavor at every step in your process. And then finally, spices and herbs, right? These are the best way to add flavor. So this slide here just has a quick rundown of some of the common spices and herbs that I would recommend keeping stocked in your kitchen. These are really versatile. They go a long way in making foods from a lot of different cuisines. And then I have a handout on the website that goes into a few more details. One of the reasons that some of the reasons I should say, there's more than one, that I really want to encourage you to focus on adding herbs and spices beyond the fact that they taste good, and this is how you're going to get a ton of flavor into your meals, is that there are great ways to add that flavor without adding sodium. And sodium is something, particularly for those of us who are concerned about heart health or hypertension or stroke, that we want to make sure we're managing our intake of. Herbs and spices are also the highest concentration of those plant-based compounds, those phytonutrients that are full of antioxidants and other anti-inflammatory compounds that reduce inflammation and help prevent chronic disease. So keeping these spices in your kitchen really goes a long way in helping your food truly be medicine. When you're using your herbs and spices, one of the best ways to get those bioactive compounds out of the spices and into your food is to let them bloom, which just means gently sauteing the spices in some oil. A lot of these polyphenols, these bioactive compounds, are fat soluble. So blooming your spices in that oil for just 30 seconds, long enough so that they become fragrant, but they don't burn, can help you maximize the polyphenol content. When you're cooking with herbs and spices, some general rule of thumb, when you're using fresh herbs, those are best used at the end of cooking or as a garnish for your meal. They have more delicate flavors that just get lost if they're cooked for long periods of time. For dried herbs, more often than not, this is something you're adding at the beginning of cooking, which that longer cooking time helps develop the flavor. And like I said, often we're cooking in oil. That's going to help improve the antioxidant power. When you're using dried and you're substituting it for fresh, typically 1 teaspoon of dried equals 1 tablespoon of fresh. There are a couple of exceptions here that I've listed on the screen, and I'll talk about that anytime I use those substitutions in any of our recipes. All right, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, I know this is quite a lot. I just want to give you a few ideas on where to start and how to keep it simple. Okay, so first and foremost, if start with what you love. If there are particular cuisines that you're really attracted to the flavor profile of, focus on stocking those spices in your cabinet. This slide here shows you some examples of commonly used spices and herbs for a few different types of cuisine. Okay, so focus on stocking up on those and playing around with combining them in your recipes. You can also use pre-made spice mixes or sauce packets. It's a really great way to start to become familiar with different flavor profiles and find what you like. They're really great, like dump and pour, instant sources of flavor, and a really good stepping stone. You do want to still read the labels and be mindful of the sodium content in them, as well as added sugar. Just like any other food that we would pick off the grocery store shelf, make sure that you recognize the names, like they're words you can pronounce. You can recognize the ingredients that are listed as real food items before you utilize that. Another great strategy is to look at the frozen meals that we talked about in our fast and easy meals class. Look at the different spice and flavor combinations that they're using, and then try to replicate that combination at home. You can also use this as a conversation starter if you're having dinner with family or friends, or someone prepared a meal for you. Like, taste the food, try to pick up on what spices are there, and ask. Start to pair what you're tasting with the spice that you're here being named. Really get curious and ask questions. You can ask these questions too in restaurants. More often than not, a knowledgeable server is going to be able to share the basics. You can also stop and smell the spices that are in your spice cabinet. If your spices are more than 6 months or a year old, they're probably not going to smell a lot, and I would recommend tossing them and replacing them with fresher spices. After that 1 year mark, you're losing a lot of the polyphenol benefits, and a lot of those flavor. Um, a lot of that flavor comes from those polyphenols. So revamp your spice cabinet if you haven't done it in 6 months or a year, and then take some time to really smell. Remember, flavor is about 80% smell. So stop, smell, and what you smell is a close approximation to what you're going to taste. So you can smell different spices and herbs next to each other and see if you think that those combinations would work well. And then really, if you really want to just keep it really simple, if you are really a salt and pepper person, and that's what you have in your spice cabinet, just challenge yourself to add one herb or one spice and play around with it. And then once you get comfortable with that one herb or that one spice, maybe you branch into another one. It's okay to start small. And really, that's the best way to build sustainable habits, is to start really small. All right. I threw a lot at you. I did promise we would cook, and we are, and I promise we will get through everything and be right on time. So let's get to the kitchen. So we're going to start with a couple different spice blends. So we talked a little bit about herbs and spices and how they're great ways to add flavor without adding a bunch of salt. Making your own spice blends is also a great way to control your sodium content. A lot of the spice blends in the grocery store are a hidden source of sodium, so we can control our salt intake and help manage our blood pressure and cardiovascular disease risk by making them at home. We can also then make them in the quantities that we need, so we don't run the risk of having a spice cabinet that is full of really old spices. All right, at the cutting board here, you can see I've got a glass bowl. We're going to make a taco seasoning. So you can vary this any way you want. The taco seasoning I'm making is going to start with some cumin. This is ground cumin. I've got some garlic powder. So that was, I'm sorry, 2 teaspoons of ground cumin. I've got a half teaspoon of garlic powder. I've got 1 tablespoon of chili powder, a half teaspoon of dried oregano. Dried oregano is a surprise ingredient in a lot of Mexican cooking. I've got some cayenne pepper. So this is a 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne. I've got a pinch of salt. And then I've got a half teaspoon of smoked paprika. And that smoked paprika is going to add kind of some savoriness, some smokiness. I'm just going to blend this all together, break up any chunks. Like, my cumin is a little clumpy. And then this will store in a glass container covered in a dry environment out of direct sun for about 4 months. Okay, and then it's good to go. This is what we use in our tempeh and lentil taco recipes. We use this for making refried beans. It's really great in a lot of different applications. So that's our taco seasoning. Next, we're gonna make a shawarma spice blend. So this is a Mediterranean, Middle Eastern kind of spice blend that use really great on chickpeas. You can use it to marinate tofu or tempeh to have kind of a smoky, savory dish. So we're gonna start with cumin. We've got 2 tablespoons of cumin. We've got 1.5 teaspoons of ground turmeric. Turmeric is a really powerful source of anti-inflammatory compounds. I've got 1/2 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. I've got 1 teaspoon of ginger. Excuse me, that was 1/2 teaspoon of ginger. Got 1/4 teaspoon of cardamom, also a really potent anti-inflammatory agent. 1 teaspoon of ground coriander, 2 teaspoons here of my smoked paprika, and then 1/8 of a teaspoon of cayenne. You could omit that if you don't like spice. All right, I'm gonna just mix this all together again. So you can notice that there's some overlap in the spices that we used in this shawarma mix and the taco seasoning, right? So stocking up on that cumin, on that, um, let's see, what else did we use? That paprika, you'd be able to make both of these. There's some crossover. Okay, so there is our shawarma spice blend right there. Last but not least, we're gonna make a classic. I feel like most people probably already have this mix in their cabinet. We're gonna make an Italian seasoning. So I've got 2 tablespoons of dried oregano, got 1 tablespoon of dried basil, a tablespoon of dried marjoram, a teaspoon of dried rosemary, and a teaspoon of dried thyme. Okay, and then again, we're just gonna mix that all together. And that is good to go. So there's your spice blend. And then I'll show you a recipe where we used this spice blend in a couple minutes. So there's your different spices. Now let's talk about another great way to add flavor, dressings. We're going to start with a really basic balsamic dressing. Excuse me, not balsamic. We kept calling it a balsamic when we were prepping for this class. It's just a basic vinaigrette. And a vinaigrette is usually 2 to 3 parts of oil to 1 part acid. So you could really play around with a bunch of different types of oils and acids here, depending on the cuisine that you're interested in. So let's say you want to take your salad or your green bowl in more of an Asian inspired direction. Your oil could be sesame oil or maybe a neutral oil like avocado. And then your acid could be, maybe it's an orange, or maybe it's something like mirin, which is a rice vinegar. Today, we're making just a classic lemon vinaigrette. So we're starting with 1/3 cup of olive oil and a few tablespoons of lemon juice. And this container, I should have mentioned, this container that I'm adding the ingredients to is a cup for an immersion blender. So we're going to make 3 different dressings, and I'm going to show you 3 different ways that we can mix those dressings together. We've got a 1/4 cup of, excuse me, a 1/2 cup of finely diced parsley. Got a teaspoon of lemon zest. So that zest is going to add a nice pop of brightness. We've got 1 clove of garlic that was finely minced. I've got a teaspoon of maple syrup. You could also use honey here. That's a nice option. And then this is about this is about a half teaspoon of salt. You could omit the salt and vary the salt based on your taste and your health needs. So this is an immersion blender. You can see this here. This is where the motor is. This is the stick. There's got this nice little blade here that's going to help us emulsify, which means mix the fat and the water, which in this case is the lemon juice, together so we get a nice smooth dressing. You definitely don't have to have an immersion blender to make dressing. I just wanted to show you how to do it if this is a tool that you would like to use. So I'm going to stick my immersion blender in the cup here, fully submerge that blade, and then away we go. All right. So that looks pretty good to me. And doing it this way by blending it in here, it's going to end up looking pretty similar to our green goddess dressing that we're about to make. But you can make this without the herbs in here. You can add like that, again, that Asian inspired dressing that we were talking about. You could do ginger, you could do red pepper flakes to add your flavor. That basic vinaigrette, again, 2 to 3 parts of oil, 1 part acid, and then some flavoring agents. So our flavoring agents in this were the parsley and the garlic. Okay, that's how, and the salt. So you can see there is our beautiful dressing ready to go on a salad or grain bowl. Next, we are going to work with a food processor. So I'm going to raise this up a little bit. So, and we are going to make a green goddess dressing. So we're starting with a 1/4 bunch of parsley and a 1/4 bunch of cilantro. I've got a 1/3 cup of water. I'm going to add about half of that in right now. And then I've got a 1/2 cup of cashews that I soaked in hot water for 10 minutes. This makes them really soft. These are raw, unsalted cashews. That makes them really soft and they'll blend better to make and make a smoother dressing here. So I've got that. I've got 2½ tablespoons of lemon juice. I've got a teaspoon of coconut aminos. Remember the coconut aminos, they're that soy sauce alternative. They're lower sodium, they're slightly sweet, but they really add that umami flavor. We've got a couple garlic cloves, and then we've got a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. We're going to blend this together. Okay, you could use, I'm gonna just give this a stir and add the rest of the water and then let this do its thing. So this recipe is a perfect example of how recipes are suggestions and you can play around with this. Really, any green herb is great in this. You could use mint, you could use dill, you could omit the cilantro if that's not something that you enjoy the taste of. But really just any green or chives would be another great option in here. You're just blending it together with that cashew. In plant-based recipes, that might be a cheese. So we're using the cashew to replace a cheese. So I'm going to give this another blend. And if you noticed, we did not use any oil in this recipe. So the cashews are also acting as that healthy fat. So if you're trying to cut down on added oils, this is a great way to do this. You could use basil in this as well. So kind of like a pesto. Okay, so we're gonna stop there. And you can see this is not quite the same salad dressing like consistency as our other vinaigrette. So this is a sauce that I would more often use like as a topping for a grain bowl or something to dip veggies in, or after I've roasted veggies. This is really nice to toss those veggies in. It's also really good for tossing pasta in for making a really vibrant and delicious pasta salad. This is a great application of this. So it's not quite as pourable. So less for a salad, more than likely, and more for some of those other applications we just talked about. All righty. Last dressing we are going to make is a tahini based dressing. So this is tahini. It is ground up sesame seeds. So it's just like peanut butter is just ground up peanuts. Tahini is just ground up sesame seeds. Sesame seeds are really high in calcium, great plant-based source of calcium. They also work, this tahini works really well to add some creaminess without having to use like a mayo or a dairy product. So I've got a half cup of tahini, and then I've got a half cup of lemon juice. So remember, we talked about sour is a really great way to balance bitter. Tahini is a little bit bitter just in and of itself. So adding this lemon juice, and I'm using a fork here to whisk. So again, you don't have to have a blender, you don't have to have an immersion blender or a food processor to make dressings. You can just use a fork and a bowl. In this case, a glass measuring cup. So I'm just mixing that lemon juice and the tahini together until I start to see the color lighten up significantly. You can see that color change here. Sometimes when if you add the tahini or the lemon juice or water slowly to the tahini, it'll seize up and it'll look like you ruined the tahini. You did not. Just keep going. The strands within the tahini just aren't fully hydrated yet. So you just need to keep adding a little bit of water and keep mixing, and then you'll get to this kind of beautiful creamy consistency. Okay. I've got a little bit of garlic. You could skip this. You don't have to have it, that I'm adding in here. So I'm adding a half teaspoon of garlic, which is equivalent, if you remember our substitutions for dried and fresh, half teaspoon of garlic powder is equivalent to 2 garlic cloves chopped up. Okay. I like using the powder in this application because I don't love eating the chunks of garlic when I'm enjoying this sauce. So the powder blends in nicely. And then I'm going to add a touch of maple syrup. So this is about a half teaspoon of maple syrup, again, to help balance out some of that bitterness that's inherent in the tahini and round out some of the sour that's in the lemon juice. So now I've got this beautiful, delicious dressing. This is one of my favorites. This is what we use in making our chickpea salad. So our like tuna salad alternative, we use a combination similar to this. I'm using this for pasta salads. We're going to put it on some roasted veggies in a second. This is also really good if you use a little bit less lemon juice and it's really thick. It can be a nice dip. You could thin this out with some water and make it into more of a salad dressing. So it's a really versatile sauce for a wide variety of applications. All right, 2 more recipes, and we might go a little over time, so I appreciate your patience with me here. But we're going to talk about roasting. We mentioned that different cooking techniques can influence flavor, and roasting is a perfect example of that. Typically, when we're roasting, it is a dry heat, so we're coating whatever food that we're roasting in some oil, and it's at a temperature that's about 350 or above. At those temperatures, I don't recommend using olive oil because olive oil's smoke point is about 350 degrees. And once we take oils past their smoke point, they actually can start to damage our cells and act as they can contribute to our inflammation, basically. So we want to ensure that we're not adding more inflammatory load on our bodies. So using an oil like avocado oil, or if that's out of your price range, a good quality canola oil could also work. Those are better for higher temperature cooking. Okay, so I'm gonna reset my cutting board here. We're gonna do two different roast vegetable options. The first one we're going to start with is a za'atar roast vegetable. So this za'atar is a combination of spices. It's common in Middle Eastern cuisine. It's a combination of like sumac and thyme and cumin and sesame seeds and oregano. So you can make that spice mix at home. You can also buy it off of the store shelf. And it's got this really nice, bright, savory flavor. And it is really, really yummy on cauliflower. So I'm going to show you how we got to the end product and then show you what that end product looks like. First, while I'm chopping, I've got my oven preheated to 400 degrees. That's a great first step to save yourself some time. I removed the outer leaves of the cauliflower, and now I'm going to core it. Just like when we've worked with cabbage in our other classes, we want to remove this kind of hard center stem. It's really tough. It's really woody. It's not going to be that enjoyable to eat. So tip of my chef's knife at the top of that triangle, making about a 45-degree cut. I'm going to put the tip of my chef's knife in at the top of the triangle. And that's about a couple centimeters. And then I'm going to slice down towards my cutting board as I'm continuing to push my knife into the core, again, maintaining that 45-degree angle. And do that on both sides. And then that core is going to pop out. I'm going to remove any of the remaining leaves. Okay. And then I am going to break my broccoli up into florets. So this is something you can do with your knife or you can do with your hands. I like doing it with my hands as far as I can. You want to get it into bite-sized pieces. So something about like that size is what you're looking for. And then these big pieces that I can't really break apart farther, then I'll cut with my knife. But I like to save my knife a little bit. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now I'm just going to cut these pieces. Those on here. And we are good to go. So now these are on my sheet tray. I've got some nice space in between all of my different pieces. That spacing, we don't want to overcrowd our sheet tray. This spacing is going to make sure that this broccoli roasts instead of steams, and that's what's going to help develop the flavor. There's a reaction called the Maillard reaction that occurs when we're roasting that occurs between the sugars, the fats, and the proteins that are present on this tray, and that's what leads to the browning. We want to be mindful that when we are cooking this, that we don't over brown or burn this food. When we brown food, there are compounds called advanced glycolated end products, or AGEs, that are formed, and consuming too many of those compounds does increase our risk for cardiovascular disease, for diabetes, and for neurodegenerative diseases. So when we are choosing to roast, making sure that we're just getting to that golden brown stage and not really beyond that can help reduce the amount of advanced glycolated end products that we're consuming. It's also a really great reason to not just eat roasted or grilled vegetables or other foods, but consume a wide variety of raw and cooked vegetables. We get more of those advanced glycolated end products from protein, so you are getting less of them from the plant foods in general, but they still form. So just something to be mindful of. All right, so our cauliflower is on the tray. Put our avocado oil on. We dusted it with za'atar spice. It goes into the oven for about 30 minutes at 450 degrees. This particular recipe has some delicious additions that we add at the end of cooking to really round out the flavors. So you'll notice here we've got some walnuts and some golden raisins. The walnuts are adding a nice textural difference because the cauliflower is really soft after being roasted in the oven, which I really enjoy that texture, but I don't want my whole meal to be that texture. So adding the walnuts, not only are we getting some omega-3 healthy fats, but we're getting a nice textural difference. And then we've got some golden raisins here that are adding some sweetness. So they're balancing out the bitterness that's in the walnuts. Walnuts are high in tannins. Tannins are where we get a lot of that bitter or that astringent kind of experience in our food. So the sweet of the golden raisins can help balance that out without having to add added sugar. And then it just also makes this dish a lot more visually appealing as well. So this is what the za'atar roasted veggies look like when they come out of the oven. They are absolutely delicious with a little bit of our tahini dressing drizzled on top. Again, tahini is commonly used in a lot of Mediterranean dishes. Za'atar is a spice blend that is used in a lot of Mediterranean meals. So you can combine those two things. They work really nicely together. All right, a couple other things I want to show you. And I know we're over time, so it won't hurt my feelings if you need to leave, because I'm not keeping up my time promise. All right, the last recipe that we are going to make is a roasted vegetable medley. We're going to use some root vegetables that are commonly in season at least in Michigan, in the fall. Parsnips are actually in season right now too, but more often we see them in the fall. So these are parsnips. I have peeled one because that's what we're going to use. I'm going to show you how to cut that, but I wanted you to see what it looked like without the peel. So in the same family as the carrot, excuse me, that's why it looks like carrot, but it's really sweet. So we peeled it. We're going to trim off the taproot end. I'm going to turn it around and trim off this stem end. And then I want to get the parsnip into bite-sized pieces. So I'm going to, I never like to work with anything that's as long as my chef knife or almost as long. So I'm going to break this into smaller pieces. Okay. The parsnip has this woody core that can sometimes be pretty tough. It's less tough on these smaller guys, but if you get a big parsnip, it can be tough. So let's cut out that woody core. Okay. Parsnips are really high in fiber and vitamin C. And again, because they're a root vegetable, they're going to have some added sweetness. It's going to be really nice balance to these Brussels sprouts that we're going to cook in this dish. Okay, so now I'm going to slice these in half again long ways. I'm going to get into pieces about that size, add to my sheet tray. That looks pretty good. All right, you've got the idea. Those are the kind of size pieces we're going for. This recipe also calls for some onions. So I'm going to, this is a yellow onion. I would recommend using a red onion if you have that. I think that'll really enhance the flavor of this dish. We're going to cut off both ends. So this is a little bit different than how we cut an onion when we're dicing it. Cut off both the stem end and the root end. I'm going to slice it in half from North Pole to South Pole. And then I am going to peel off the outer layers, those papery layers. Right. And then I'm going for slices here instead of dicing. So I am making my claw with my one hand. I've got my chef's knife pinched between my thumb and my first finger, 3 fingers around the blade. And then I'm just keeping the tip of the knife on the cutting board as I make slices all the way around the perimeter of that onion. So pieces like that. Okay, that goes on my sheet tray as well. And finally, we've got some Brussels sprouts. And these still have their outer leaves on them. I want to get those off. So I'm going to cut the stem, or excuse me, the where the Brussels sprout attaches to the stem off, remove any loose leaves, cut the Brussels in half, throw that on my sheet tray. And when I'm roasting veggies, I want to try to get every piece, no matter what vegetable it is that I'm cutting, roughly the same size so that everything cooks at about the same time. Okay, so some of these Brussels are a little bit on the bigger side, so I might cut them in quarters so that they're about the same size. All right, so I've got those veggies. I need my final veggie is sweet potato. So this is my giant sweet potato. I am going to cut it in half before I peel it, just for the sake of demonstration here. I've got my Y veggie peeler. This is my preferred type of vegetable peeler because of the ease in which you can control it. And I feel like it gives you, makes the job go a little bit faster. All right, so I've got my sweet potato. I'm going to cut this piece in half lengthwise, and I'm going to make long slices. Stack those slices on top of each other, cut it in half, and get to my large dice chop size pieces. Okay, so I'm going for pieces like that. All right, those are going on my tray as well. So this is kind of what those veggies are going to look like before they go into the oven. I'm going to add some avocado oil, toss them with Italian seasoning, and then into a 400-degree oven they go for about 30 minutes or until all of the veggies are soft. And then they come out looking like this. Beautiful, delicious. We've got that caramelization on the onions and the Brussels sprouts. We've got some savory spices, doing some good work from our Italian seasoning blend. And this also would be another great application for that tahini dressing, or you could use even some of that vinaigrette that we made here would also be nice. I also like to finish this recipe with a splash of lemon juice. These root vegetables can be a little bit heavier in their flavor. And again, we're getting a lot of sweetness from that sweet potato and the parsnip. So that splash of lemon juice can really lighten the dish a little bit and add a little bit more pizzazz. All right, we did it. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I appreciate your patience with the technical issues. I hope this gave you some more ideas on how to build some flavor into your meals, and you're feeling excited to try some of these recipes. If you do try them, I would love to hear about it. So please email us at lifestylemedicine@trinity-health.org. If you have any questions about anything that came up, you can also email us at that email address. And if you're a Trinity Health colleague, do not forget to email that email address about your Live Your Whole Life points so that you can keep your insurance premium low. Thank you so much for spending this time with me tonight. I look forward to it every month, and I'm so glad that you're here. And I hope to see you next month when we make over some family favorite recipes. Take good care and happy cooking.